Hello everyone and welcome to the next lecture of the Silk Road Chapters project. And today we will talk about one of the most fascinating empires and states in the history of Central Asia, the Kushan Empire. Founded by Yuezhi nomads, this empire became a powerful economical and political force in this region. From its mysterious origins to the vital role on the Great Silk Road, Kushan Empire bridged cultures, politics and economy on the vast territories of Central Asia. Let's start with the situation in Central Asia before Kushan arrived here. So here existed Greco-Bactrian kingdom, a Hellenistic state which existed for around 130 years. It broke away from Seleucid Empire, which was a part of Alexander the Great legacy. Greek culture spread over Central Asia during this time, from coinage and architecture to language and government. And by the time Kushan tribes arrived to this territory, Greco-Bactrian kingdom was already in decline. We actually discussed it in our previous lecture, so if you haven't seen yet, please check it out. This decline wasn't sudden. In Greco-Bactrian kingdom, they suffered from the internal instability and also from the invasions of nomadic people. The Greek cities, the Greek rulers, they constantly fight against one another, and that's how these cities, even though they were rich in art and culture, but they were too weak to oppose the invasion of nomadic tribes. The constant pressure from Saka and Yuezhi tribes destroyed their trading routes and also caused the urban centers to be abandoned. So Bactrian countryside became more militarized, and that's how the Greek cities, they were isolated from these countrysides where people kept on speaking Iranian languages and also worshipping the local deities. And that's how this power vacuum led the new power to step in, and Yuezhi became that power. Now let's talk about the Kushans. The story begins not in Central Asia but in Western China, and Yuezhi, who later became famous as Kushan, they lived near Taklamakan Desert in Tarim Basin. The main business was mining of jade and then trading it to China, and we know how much they valued jade in China. And this lasted for several centuries until Yuezhi were moved west by Sunnu to the eastern Kazakhstan, more precisely Ili River, and in their turn they pushed Saka tribes from their territories. Saka moved to the south, and finally they came to Greco-Bactrian kingdom, destroyed it, and moved further to the south, to India, when they founded Indo-Scythian state. The Yuezhi migration wasn't a single event. It was long, a complex process which lasted for quite some time. And when Yuezhi tribes came here to Central Asia, they brought with them their parts of nomadic lifestyle, horse breeding, archery, portable yurts, and also tribal council system. Slowly they adopted the urban living, and they adopted some of the elements of the local Greco-Bactrian and Hellenistic lifestyle. They learned how to mint the coins, how to govern the cities, and also how to deal with Indian satraps. Slowly they changed their lifestyle from nomadic to the settled, and actually this transformation, it is one of the most important in Central Asian history, and it shows how mobile groups could reshape their regional politics without fully abandoning their roots. The Yuezhi kept moving to the south, and finally in the 2nd century BC they arrived to the territory of Bactria, which is southern Uzbekistan and northern Afghanistan. And here it's very important to mention that they were not just one tribe, but they were a confederation of at least 5 tribes, and Kushan, one of them, finally it became the leading tribe and gave its name for the whole empire. But in the Chinese sources they were still called Da Yuezhi, or the big or great Yuezhi. Interesting fact, even though Yuezhis, they lived in China, but they were Indo-Europeans. But sadly, we don't know a lot about the early dates of the Kushan Empire, because each ruler had their own dating system starting from their reign. And that's how scholars, they have around 30 of different chronologies. And that's how, if you see different dates, probably it's not a mistake, it's just different theories. One of the key sources of the early Kushan history is Chinese scholar Ban Gu, who described the movement of and settlement of Da Yuezhi in his book of Han. He calls them barbarians, but at the same time he noted their strengths and organization. Other fragments come from Buddhist texts and also the inscriptions found in Afghanistan, such as Rabatak and Surkhatal. Interestingly, these inscriptions, they not only mention the name of the kings, but also the religious affiliation, the conquest, and the legal reforms. And another fascinating thing that from that inscriptions we can understand that Yuezhi kings probably started to develop the alphabet for their own dialect, but unfortunately it wasn't deciphered yet. Anyway, by the second half of the 2nd century BC, the Yuezhi Confederation arrived to the territory of Central Asia, modern Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. The 5 Yuezhi tribes, they started to live across Bactria, and the first king that had the title Kushan is Heraeus, and we can find his name mentioned on the coins from around the turn of the era. That suggests that for around 150 years this territory was ruled by the loose alliance of tribes, and Heraeus, he probably united them as a single state, and we can find his name mentioned even in a later period on some coins as a tribute to the founder. By the time of Kujula Kadphises, Kushan was already a centralized kingdom and ready to expand, and during the time of Vima Takto, they conquered the northern and central India. And its peak, the Kushan Empire included the most part of India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and southern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. At that time, around 2000 years ago, Kushan was one of the most powerful and big empires in the world, together with Roman Empire, Han in China, Parthian Empire, and Persians. At their height, Kushan created a system of power that rivaled ones of Roman Empire and also Han China. The army included the war elephants, armored cavalry, cataphracts, and also light steppe horsemen. They also built a road system that connected Bactria to Gandhara and northern India. These roads, they really helped to move quickly goods, troops, and tax collectors across the long distances. Kushan also started to use the title King of the Kings, Shahin Shah, which they borrowed from Achaemenids and Parthians. And this title, it was not just a boast, but it showed that Kushan took themselves as equals among the great powers of the world. Kushan developed a strong military technology. They took the best from both sides. They united the nomadic cavalry with the siege warfare used in the cities. These were very advanced methods for their time, and Kushan found a lot of success on the battlefield. In administrative management, Kushan took the system which existed in Central Asia since the Achaemenid time, but they had strong leaders in the cities, but at the same time the local elite ruled in the smaller provinces and cities. Many of that local elite were descendants of Greek and Iranian aristocracy that survived the previous empires, and very often Kushan led them to rule their territories as long as they paid taxes and pledged loyalty. In return, this aristocracy built temples, sponsored inscriptions, and also supported the royal family. Some of the Kushan governors, they preserved the name strategos, which is Greek, but the others were using the word satrap, which is Persian. The blending of administrative cultures allowed for the efficient control of the multi-ethnical population. And because Kushans didn't impose any religion or language, the regional identities could continue to thrive under the broader imperial system. We're not even sure where the capital of Kushan Empire was. It probably moved several times, and the archaeological sites that we have suppose that probably the capital was in Halchian, Ayaltam, Dervezin in Uzbekistan, then Surkhatal and Rabatak in Afghanistan. But after Kushan conquered India, they moved their capital to Pataliputra, which is Peshawar in the modern Pakistan. In all that places, the images of the kings were found along with the dynasty temples, because the kings of Kushan Empire were highly respected, and here they were not taken as the gods like in Egypt, for example, but because they symbolized strength, unity, and power. And in many of that temples, we can see the depictions of the kings, of their children, of their wives, and actually that was not a rare thing in the East. For example, Khwarezmian and Parthian rulers did the same. Archaeological digs at Surkatal, for example, they show us a big temple structure with steps, altar, and the inscriptions in Bactrian using the Greek alphabet. The famous Rabatak inscription even lists the names of Kushan cities and the deities which were worshipped there. In Ayratam, in the carved stone relief, we can see the depictions of musicians, of dancers, of palace guards, giving us the insights of the court life and also ceremonial events. The kings were very often shown seated on the thrones, and they were surrounded by lions and bulls, the symbols of political strength and legitimacy which united the Greek, Iranian and Indian motifs. And these depictions, they were not just for beauty, but that was a clear political statement which the king sent all over the empire. So as you can imagine, the Kushan Empire was quite diverse because it united different cultures, religion, languages, ethnic groups. And how was it possible? Well, first of all, because Kushan kings showed the tolerance. They respected all their subjects and in their religion and in their everyday life. For example, by the 2nd century AD, Buddhism spread quite widely across Central Asia, especially in the southern Uzbekistan. And the archaeological sites like Kara-Tepe and Fayaz-Tepe in Termes, they prove it. And Kanishka, the Great, the most famous ruler of Kushan Empire, he really supported Buddhism. But at the same time, in the Rabatak temple in Afghanistan, we can find him worshipping Zoroastrian gods like Ahura Mazda and Mitra. Kanishka's patronage for Buddhism was just groundbreaking. For example, he organized the 4th Buddhist Council in Kashmir, where scholars debated philosophical questions and debated texts. This event helped to shape the Mahayana Buddhism, which was focused on compassion, bodhisattvas, and the idea that enlightenment could be reached by everyone. Under Kanishka, the Buddhist monks were freely traveling across India, Bactria and China. He even minted the coins with the depiction of Buddha, where he has halo around his head. And actually, it's one of the first depictions of Buddha that show him as a divine figure. And these coins were found as far as Sri Lanka or Mongolia. Among the nobility, both Buddhism and Zoroastrianism were popular. The Hindu gods were worshipped too. For example, Shiva was proclaimed to be the protector of Vima Kadphises and Vasudeva I. And also, he was very often associated with Oksho, the god of the waters. And the mixing of the cultures and religions, it was not a problem for Kushan empires because they were mixing them in a way that worked for them. The unique example of religious blending for Kushan was the god named Aksho. He had the features from several gods, like Shiva with his trident and the third eye. Also Zoroastrian water gods with water waves and nymphs, and even the Dionysian features of the Greek art like ivy and grapes. And actually these gods, they didn't fight between each other, they lived in harmony. For Kushan, the divine power could be expressed in many ways. They inscriptions, they mention dozens of gods that united together without any hierarchy. Even in burial traditions, we can see variety, like cremations for Buddhism, sky burial for Zoroastrians, and underground tombs Greek style, and they all coexisted in the empire of Kushans. This brings us to syncretism, the blending of cultural and religious elements. And Kushan Empire was one of the best examples of it because they merged Indian, Bactrian, Persian and Greek elements. And for example, the Sumerian goddess Inanna and Zoroastrian goddess Anahita are very often fused in one image. At Dalverzin Tepe, Zoroastrian gods are also mentioned in Buddhist temple, another sign of religious fusion. There were also syncretism in dresses and art. For example, Kushan rulers were very often depicted wearing thick Central Asian trousers, plus Indian-style jewelry, plus Iranian-style headdresses. Female figures on temple walls could wear some Hellenistic robes, but at the same time they were carrying lotus flowers in their hands or stand in Indian mudras, sacred hand gestures. Even the musical instrument reflects this fusion. Lutes, flutes, and double-headed drum appear in the art of Gandhara in Termes, showing the blend of steppe, Indian, and Persian traditions. They kept their Hellenistic elements too. For example, the goddesses like Nike, the victory, and Taish, the fortune, were very often depicted in the coins of Kushan period, but they were adapted to the local style. For example, wearing the Kushan clothes or shown with the Bactrian symbols. The Kushan Empire also played a great role in developing of Gandhara art, the style which united Persian, Indian and Hellenistic elements. And Gandhara is a region which is now located at the border of the modern Afghanistan and Pakistan. In Gandhara of that times, the Buddhism art was really developed, and that's actually the place where one of the first depictions of the Buddha appeared. Before that, the Buddha was never shown in human form, and that art and sculptures, they had to spread Buddhism as a religion, firstly from India to Central Asia, then to China, and finally to Japan. In the other words, Buddhism as a religion, it didn't came directly from India to China, but from India to Central Asia and only then to China. Even in the languages, we can see diversity. At first, Kushans, they used a lot of Greek, which was still common in the documents. Then they adopted the Bactrian, the Middle Iranian language, which they were writing in Greek alphabet and called that Aryan script. Also, they used Kharosthi, which was a typical script for the northern part of India. And plus, there was also a mysterious script, probably the native language of Yuezhi, which still hasn't been deciphered. And all these four languages and scripts, they were used in the official documents because Kushan wanted every subject to understand their commands. Coins were also multilingual. For example, on the one side they could be Bactrian and then Greek or Kharosthi on the other side. It was actually a very practical solution, as in the multi-ethnic empire there were merchants, administrators or priests that spoke different languages. And what is amazing that its linguistic diversity didn't weaken the empire. On the contrary, it strengthened it. How is it possible? Well, people could see that their religion and their language is presented on the official documents and also coins, and that helped to unify the empire under the shared political identity. And of course, we can't forget the trade. The Kushan period marked the beginning of the long-distance trade and plus the early fame of the Silk Road. We will cover the history of the Great Silk Road in one of our next lectures. And 2000 years ago, the known world was divided between four empires. It's Han Chinese, Parthians, the Roman Empire, and of course Kushans. That created the perfect conditions for the trade. Each empire wanted to have the safe caravan routes. That's why the roads were reconstructed, then the rest stops were built, and the currency systems were developed to ease the transactions. It helped the local art, craft, and economy to grow. Kushans controlled one of the most profitable sections of the Great Silk Road, the route which was going from India through Central Asia and further. So the goods which they transported, they were gems, spices, ivory, silk, and of course the luxury goods which were coming from Mediterranean and China. One famous archaeological site, Begram in Afghanistan, showed a treasure trove of Kushan goods. For example, the Roman glassware, Indian ivory, China's lacquered boxes, and also the local ceramics. It shows that Kushan, they were not just the middlemen, but they also were cultural curators. They absorbed foreign objects and reinterpreted them with their own art and design. Some of the artisans, they even created Roman-style goods to sell them to Indian elite. This blending of styles, techniques, and markets really helped to create a truly global economy long before the modern globalization. Sadly, the golden age of Kushan Empire didn't last for long. By the end of the 2nd century AD, the empire started to decline. Probably there were some dynastic disputes, and also there were a major earthquake which destroyed the cities of Artam, Halchayan, and Kampertapa. Under Vasudeva I, the empire started to break into the smaller kingdoms. Then there was invasion from the growing Sassanid Empire and also of Empire of Gupta from India. And then finally in the 5th century the tribes of Hephthalites came and then destroyed what was left from the Kushan Empire. So what was the legacy of Kushan Empire? At first, of course, the support of Buddhism helped to spread these religions throughout Asia, especially along the Great Silk Road. The stupas and monasteries which were constructed under the reign of Kushan really became the centers of education and pilgrimage. Cultural syncretism and art. The Gandhara art, which was developing during the Kushan period, left a lasting imprint on the Buddhist art in Central Asia, in China, and in Japan. The fusion of Hellenistic, Indian, and Iranian elements in Kushan art set a precedent for the syncretism art in the region. Trade and economic influence. The growth of Kushan Empire in the development of the Great Silk Road helped to establish a network that would facilitate East-West exchange for centuries, influencing the economies of Roman Empire, of China, of India, and of Persia. The Kushan Empire was one of the most influential empires in the history of Central Asia. It reached East and West, promoting trade, cultural fusion, and religious exchange across its vast territory. The empire's support for Buddhism and also its role in Silk Road trade created a long-lasting legacy that shaped the cultural and economic landscape of Central Asia and beyond. If you like this lecture, please comment, share, and like, and also follow us so you won't miss any future lectures.